Have you ever looked at an old photograph and felt that something inside it was watching you? Back tonight, we're traveling to Pittsburgh, 1902, a city of steel and smoke where one family posed for what seemed to be an innocent portrait. But hidden within that frame was something far darker, something no one noticed for more than a century. When Dr. Margaret Henley, a modern forensic historian, began studying the Morrison family photograph, she thought she was examining a relic of industrial America. Instead, she uncovered traces of poisoned deceit and a chilling story of a murder disguised as love, a crime frozen forever in time, waiting for science to speak its truth. How could a single photograph capture the very moment of betrayal? And how many other secrets from history are still hiding in plain sight, smiling back at us from faded paper? Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? And if this is your first time visiting Sleepy History Tales, don't forget to subscribe and ring the little bell so you never miss a whisper from the past. Now settle in, and let's step quietly into the Morrison mystery. Margaret Chen leaned closer to the velvet-lined table, her eyes tracing over the scattered relics of another century. Under the soft amber lights of the riverside estate sale, time itself seemed to hum faintly. The faint scent of dust, old varnish, and forgotten perfume lingered in the air. Among the countless antique photographs, one caught her attention, a formal family portrait dated 1902. As a senior appraiser for the Hartwell Auction House in Philadelphia, Margaret had developed a sharp instinct for hidden worth. But this photograph, something about it felt different. It showed the Morrison family, one of Pittsburgh's most powerful steel dynasties, gathered around an elaborate mahogany dining table. The room was bathed in soft, natural light. The scene perfectly staged, silver gleaming crystal, glinting every napkin and fork in meticulous order. At the head sat the patriarch Thomas Morrison, a man well into his 70s. Though he maintained an air of dignity, his frail posture and the ornate wheelchair hinted at failing health. Behind him stood his younger wife, Helena, one delicate hand resting on his shoulder, protective or perhaps possessive. Their 3 grown children, Robert, Catherine, and William, were arranged around the table, faces carefully composed into polite expressions that felt almost too deliberate, too rehearsed. For a photograph taken in 1902, the clarity was extraordinary. Every thread of fabric, every glint of the chandelier, every flicker of expression was frozen in unnerving detail. Whoever the photographer had been, they possessed not just skill but intention. The Morrison estate, the sale coordinator murmured when she noticed Margaret's interest. One of Pittsburgh's oldest steel families. This one was found in the attic, kept in a separate frame, specially protected. Seems it meant something to them. Margaret didn't hesitate. She bought the photograph on instinct alone. Not for its monetary value, but because something in her gut whispered that this image held more than just family pride. Back at the Hartwell offices, she began her careful examination, gloved hands, archival lighting, digital enhancement. And as the old image appeared on her monitor in startling clarity, she realized this was not simply a family dinner. There were layers hidden within the stillness. When she magnified the faces, new subtleties emerged. The patriarch's eyes slightly glazed, his hands weakly gripping the silver utensils. The faint tension at the corners of the children's mouths. The way Helena's gaze seemed fixed not on her husband, but on something beyond the frame. The enhanced resolution brought even the food into focus arrangements so precise they almost looked staged, symbolic. Margaret felt a slow chill crawl along her spine. Was this photograph merely a moment of domestic grace, or the silent witness to something no one ever spoke of again? The meal in the photograph seemed at first glance to be a traditional Sunday dinner, the kind reserved for families of stature. Plates brimming with roasted meats, buttered vegetables, and sauces glistening under the chandelier's warm light. Bottles of wine and crystal carafes of water were carefully arranged, every setting an unspoken declaration of refinement. But when Margaret zoomed in closer, she noticed something strange. The plate before Thomas Morrison the patriarch was different. His meal appeared smaller, more delicate, carefully arranged as if chosen for a fragile stomach. None of the others seemed to share the same dish. The detail nagged at her, pulling her into the kind of quiet obsession that only true historians understand. So she reached out to someone who might help. Dr. James Patterson, a historian at the University of Pennsylvania, known for his research into early 20th century American family life and dining customs. Dr. Patterson's reply came swiftly and with an enthusiasm that piqued her curiosity even further. He recognized the name Morrison immediately. The Morrisons, he wrote, were one of Pittsburgh's great steel dynasties. Thomas Morrison made his fortune during the boom of the 1880s and 90s. But his death in 1903, well, that's a story that never quite settled. Margaret leaned back in her chair. The photograph, she realized, had likely been taken during the final year of the old man's life. And if that were true, then it wasn't just a portrait. It was a window into the last calm moment before a storm. As Dr. Patterson dug deeper into the archives, the picture grew darker. Newspaper clippings, court documents, and personal correspondence painted a portrait not of domestic peace, but of a family slowly fracturing beneath the weight of its own fortune. Thomas Morrison's empire had made him one of the richest men in Pennsylvania by 900. But success came at a cost. The question of inheritance had turned the Morrison home into a quiet, battleground wife against husband, children against one another. There were whispers even then that the old man's mind was beginning to fail. Old Pittsburgh newspapers hinted at disputes over the will and subtle questions about Thomas's competency. Medical records from the Presbyterian Hospital revealed that his health began to collapse in early 1902, around the very time the family photograph was taken. He suffered from severe stomach pain, weakness, and peculiar neurological tremors. Doctors at the time blamed it on age and stress, but perhaps it wasn't only that. Thomas Morrison died in March of 1903. The coroner's report listed gastric distress and general debility. Yet several attending physicians privately admitted that the symptoms were unusually rapid and inconsistent with natural decline. Dr. Patterson unearthed a letter, one written by Thomas himself in late 1902, to his business attorney. The tone was fearful, almost desperate. In it, Thomas confessed he believed his wife and children were pressuring him to alter his will, to surrender control of his businesses before he died. It was a troubling confession, and one that, when combined with the peculiarities of that dinner plate, began to form a chilling picture. Helena Morrison, his second wife, stood to inherit nearly everything. She had married Thomas in 1895, years after the death of his first wife. His 3 adult children would each receive modest sums enough to live comfortably, but far less than what they might have expected. The motives, it seemed, were all in place. But evidence was another matter entirely. And perhaps that's why the photograph had been kept so carefully hidden away in a protective frame for over a century. A relic not of remembrance, but of guilt. By 1902, the Morrison household had grown quieter than usual. The once bustling mansion that had echoed with the footsteps of servants now stood strangely still. The family's live-in cook and domestic staff, those who had served them faithfully for years, were all dismissed in the months before Thomas Morrison's death. Some of those former servants later told investigators in cautious, trembling recollections that something had changed in that grand home. The daily routines became secretive, the master's condition worsening, and the new mistress of the house forbidding anyone to speak of it beyond the walls of the estate. Intrigued by this new layer of history, Margaret decided to return to the photograph. She had studied hundreds of images before, but this one, she now realized, might contain evidence of something that had never been meant to be seen. Using modern forensic enhancement tools, she magnified the dining table once more. Every reflection, every shadow on the porcelain plates was rendered in startling clarity. And there, among the gleam of silver and glass, she noticed it again. Thomas Morrison's meal was not the same. The others enjoyed hearty portions, roasted meats, vegetables, crusty bread. But Thomas's plate, his meal seemed restrained, arranged too carefully, as though prepared under specific instructions. Margaret sought help from Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, a food historian and toxicology expert from Johns Hopkins University. If anyone could read the secrets hidden in an Edwardian dinner, it would be her. Together they examined the enhanced image, and what they found was unsettling. Thomas's food bore differences too precise to ignore darker sauces, thicker gravies, a different texture altogether. Even his beverage served in a distinct glass appeared, unlike the wine or water poured for the others. Perhaps Dr. Rodriguez mused he was on a special diet. But in 1902, diets weren't always prescribed for recovery. Her voice trailed off as she magnified a section of the plate. A faint dusting, barely visible, clung to the edges of the food, a fine white residue that none of the other plates contained. Dr. Rodriguez explained that at the turn of the century, the line between household medicine and poison was perilously thin. Arsenic was everywhere, woven into wallpaper pigments, paint, rat, poison, even beauty products. In small controlled doses, it could sicken a person slowly day by day, with symptoms that mimicked natural aging or digestive illness. And those symptoms, nausea, weakness, tremors, matched the medical reports that Dr. Patterson had already uncovered. Margaret stared at the photograph in silence. The image that once appeared to capture a genteel family dinner now seemed to whisper of something else, a quiet ritual of control, perhaps even betrayal. When the enhancement software focused on the serving area near Helena Morrison, a new pattern emerged. She wasn't merely standing behind her husband. She was serving him, her hand poised with the utensils, her body angled toward his plate alone. Every other family member appeared, still waiting, watching. Dr. Rodriguez's findings left Margaret shaken. If her interpretation was correct, the woman in the photograph wasn't just posing for a family portrait. She might have been in the very act of administering the thing that would end her husband's life. To confirm her growing suspicion, Margaret contacted Dr. Michael Thompson, a forensic toxicologist and medical historian, renowned for studying historical poisoning cases. Dr. Thompson reviewed the enhanced image, the hospital records, and Dr. Patterson's findings in detail. It didn't take him long to see what the others were beginning to suspect. The symptoms recorded in 1902, the stomach pain, the weakness, the neurological decline, aligned perfectly with one of the most feared and subtle poisons of the era, arsenic. As he leaned back from his notes, he said quietly, "If Thomas Morrison was poisoned, this photograph might be the only witness left." Dr. Michael Thompson leaned forward in the dim light of Margaret's office, the old photograph spread out before them like a silent witness. His tone was measured, but every word seemed to echo in the room. The symptoms, he said softly: stomach distress, weakness, tremors. They match arsenic exposure perfectly. Gradual, controlled, administered over months, not days. Both Margaret and Dr. Rodriguez listened in stillness. Arsenic poisoning, Dr. Thompson explained, was tragically common in the early 1900s. It could kill without leaving a trace, and its effects, nausea, fatigue, confusion, were easily mistaken for the frailties of age. The substance existed everywhere in wallpaper pigments, in rodent poison, even in certain medicines of the time. It was quite literally a poison hiding in plain sight. When Dr. Thompson examined the photograph again, he pointed to the faint discolorations on Thomas Morrison's food. The darker sauces, the irregular textures, the thin white residue dusted across certain items. Each of these, he said, could be the subtle fingerprints of arsenic. "The pattern of his illness fits too," he murmured. Periods of improvement followed by collapse. That's what happens when someone is exposed again and again. Just enough to keep them weak, but not enough to die right away. Margaret felt the air grow heavier around her. Dr. Thompson then noted something that made her shiver. The dismissal of the household servants, so sudden, so close to the time of death, might not have been coincidence at all. Servants, after all, were the eyes and ears of the house. They would have been the first to notice when meals changed, when a hand lingered too long near a plate, or when an illness seemed to follow its own quiet schedule. Eliminate the servants, and you eliminate the witnesses. Most chilling of all, Dr. Thompson explained that in 1902, few doctors would ever have suspected poisoning unless they had reason to. Testing for arsenic required special reagents and suspicion, two things that rarely existed in the homes of the wealthy. The Morrison name alone would have discouraged any such notion. After all, who would accuse one of Pittsburgh's most respected families of murder? As the implications settled over them, Margaret looked again at the photograph. The frozen smiles, the poised stillness, it no longer looked like a family dinner. It looked like a crime unfolding in silence. This image, Dr. Thompson said, finally might be the only surviving evidence of a murder as it was happening. Margaret felt both awe and dread in equal measure. If true, this wasn't just a historical artifact, it was a century-old confession, hidden in plain sight for 120 years. With the evidence mounting, she contacted Detective Lieutenant Sarah Walsh from the Philadelphia Police Department's Cold Case Unit. It was a long shot, she knew, over 100 years too late for justice, but perhaps not too late for truth. To Margaret's surprise, Detective Walsh agreed to take a look. She was intrigued by the photograph, by the expert testimony, by the possibility that an unsolved death from 1903 might finally tell its story. No one can be prosecuted, Walsh admitted, but that doesn't mean we can't reopen the record. Sometimes the dead deserve to have their truth spoken even if no one is left to answer for it. She reached out to Pittsburgh authorities and began combing through what remained of the old police and coroner's files. What she found there was more revealing than anyone had expected. The Morrison death had been investigated far more thoroughly than the newspapers of the time suggested. Police reports from 1903 mentioned questioning the children, the servants, even Helena Morrison herself. Officers had noted inconsistencies in the family's statements and suspicious domestic circumstances. But then, the paper trail simply stopped. Detective Walsh discovered why. The case had been quietly closed under pressure from Pittsburgh's most powerful industrial families, those whose fortunes too were built on steel and social reputation. A scandal involving one of their own, she realized, could have threatened more than the Morrison legacy. It could have shaken an entire social order. The deeper Detective Walsh delved into the archives, the darker the Morrison legacy became. In the early 1900s, wealth was not merely a comfort, it was a shield. And the Morrison family, with their steel empire gleaming across Pittsburgh's skyline, knew how to use it well. Their fortune and their friends in high places had protected them from scrutiny. Yet behind that polished veneer, something dreadful had taken place. Helena Morrison. Thomas's widow had remarried within a year and a half of his death, an astonishingly short mourning period for a woman of her standing. Her new husband, a close associate of the Morrison Steel Company. And through that union, vast portions of the Morrison estate quietly changed hands. Was it love? Or was it strategy? Old court records revealed a troubling pattern. Two of Thomas's children from his first marriage had once contested their stepmother's inheritance, claiming their father had been manipulated, that his mind was clouded in his final months. Their case was dismissed, of course, but the whispers of suspicion lingered. Former servants had told investigators of strange new rules inside the Morrison mansion. Thomas had been isolated, denied visitors, and his wife unusually had taken over food preparation herself. Each of these details, when examined together, painted a chilling picture. A man slowly poisoned both in body and in influence, until even his wealth no longer belonged to him. Detective Walsh's findings grew increasingly grim. Surviving court documents from Pittsburgh revealed a web of deception, far beyond a single act of murder. There were forged signatures, whole business empires quietly transferred into the hands of Helena's relatives. Millions of dollars worth of assets siphoned away under Thomas's fading eyes. Even more unsettling, the detective discovered that Helena had hired a physician known to treat the city's underworld, a man named Dr. James Crawford. His medical notes described prescriptions that would ease pain, yet also mask the classic signs of arsenic poisoning. Convenient, perhaps, for a family eager to make death appear gentle and natural. And so it was. For more than a year, Helena had prepared for this moment, isolating Thomas, turning away friends who asked after him, and dismissing servants who might have seen too much. The fire in the mansion's hearth burned late into the night, as documents and ledgers vanished into the flames. Only one relic of that house escaped the purge, the 1902 family photograph. A single frozen moment, an image that now seemed to hold the truth of an entire murder conspiracy. Detective Walsh's research uncovered one final horror. The Morrison family had not only planned the poisoning, they had prepared the cover-up in advance. Helena arranged for Thomas's immediate cremation, bribing the attending physician to sign a death certificate without so much as an autopsy. Within hours, his body and any proof of poison was gone forever. And so, what remained was a photograph, a smiling family gathered around a dinner table, unaware that history would one day expose them. But was the photograph truly unaware? Or was there something about it, a shadow, a gesture, a detail that seemed almost to confess? Perhaps you'll see it too, if you look closely enough. As Detective Walsh's research deepened, the picture of the Morrison family's crime began to take on new and unsettling clarity. It was no longer a tale of simple greed or a single act of poisoning. What emerged was a portrait of design, a web of deliberate fraud, medical deceit, and systematic destruction of evidence so careful it bordered on genius or madness. Margaret, guided by her growing obsession with the photograph, gathered her team once more. Using advanced forensic imaging, they began to peel back the layers of that 1902 family portrait, one brushstroke of history at a time. What they uncovered made even the most seasoned experts fall silent. The enhanced image revealed strange, almost choreographed positioning. Helena Morrison's hand rested on the table, not casually, but precisely over a cluster of dishes, her fingers concealing something from view. Her children sat in a way that blocked the camera's sightlines, forming a quiet wall between the lens and the evidence. Had they known what they were hiding, or had guilt already begun to move through them, invisible but instinctive? Then came the discovery that changed everything. Tiny reflections barely visible to the naked eye appeared on the polished silverware and the glass of a decanter. When enhanced, they revealed the faint outlines of two men standing in the background. One of them unmistakably resembled Dr. James Crawford, the shadowy physician who had attended Thomas during his final decline. It seemed the dinner had not only been staged, it had been supervised. The analysis grew more chilling still. Objects once thought to be decorative silver containers, small crystal flasks, were found to have hidden purposes. They were poison vessels, disguised utensils for administering toxic compounds, and even medical devices designed to monitor Thomas's response in real time. And there in the heart of the image, Thomas Morrison himself, his eyes faintly dilated, his expression uneasy. Under high magnification, subtle tremors of the pupils suggested the onset of arsenic toxicity. The photograph, Margaret realized, might have captured the very moment of his poisoning. But why take such a picture? The answer came with another revelation. The session had been arranged not by chance, but by intent. Records from the photographer, a man named Heinrich Müller, showed that the Morrison sitting had been scheduled at unusual hours with special lighting and multiple retakes. He had been paid a sum so large that it raised eyebrows even a century later. This was no casual portrait of a happy family. It was a performance, an alibi on paper. A staged display of health harmony and control to reassure lawyers, bankers, and perhaps even a future court. And beneath the fine china, under the edges of a lace tablecloth, digital enhancement revealed something extraordinary. The faint handwriting of notes, poison dosages, timing intervals, half hidden beneath the dinnerware. The murderers had documented their own crime without realizing it. As Detective Walsh pieced the story together, it became clear that the Morrison curse did not end with Thomas's death. Helena Morrison's second husband, another wealthy associate, died in 1908 under the same mysterious symptoms: nausea, weakness, a slow wasting away. The police investigated this time, but Helena fled before charges could be filed, vanishing west with what remained of the Morrison fortune. The children who had once helped their stepmother soon fell into ruin. Robert Morrison, tormented by guilt, took his own life in 1915, leaving letters that confessed his part in the conspiracy. Catherine, once poised and elegant, became a recluse, drowning her fortune in alcohol until she died penniless in 1920. And William the youngest tried to reinvent himself. But in 1925, he was arrested for fraud after forging documents to claim a second inheritance. His trial exposed decades of buried secrets, turning the Morrison name into a cautionary whisper throughout Pennsylvania. Detective Walsh's final report uncovered even darker truths. The Morrison plot had not been unique. It was part of a network of similar crimes. At least 3 other wealthy Pittsburgh men had died under nearly identical circumstances, all connected to Helena's social circle. Each death followed the same pattern: slow poisoning, quiet inheritance transfers, and the silencing of servants who asked too many questions. In the end, the Morrison Steel Company itself collapsed during the Panic of 1907. Years of theft and deceit had hollowed it from within until there was nothing left to stand on. Hundreds of workers lost their jobs, their savings, their security, all victims of the same greed that had claimed Thomas Morrison's life. And so the photograph remains. A single image preserved against time, capturing not only a family, but a moment of collective sin. A dinner table where every smile hides a secret. A portrait where the dead man still sits among the living, poisoned beneath the glow of lamplight. If you were to look at that photograph tonight, would you see the same thing they saw? Or would you too begin to notice the truth waiting quietly in the reflections? The Morrison family's sins, it seemed, did not rest quietly in the past. Their crimes rippled outward through time, through bloodlines, through the fragile thread that connects history to the present. Detective Walsh's final discovery brought the story full circle. Using modern forensic science, investigators were able to test hair and fabric samples preserved from Thomas Morrison's personal effects scraps, once sealed away in an archival box, untouched for more than a century. The results were undeniable. High concentrations of arsenic. Proof scientific irrefutable that Thomas Morrison had not died of age or illness, but by deliberate poisoning. The old photograph, once a curiosity, was now something far greater. It was evidence. A still image of a murder in motion, capturing the precise moment when deception, greed, and death met across a dinner table. Margaret's investigation concluded not with the clang of courtroom justice, but with quiet revelation. Her findings became the centerpiece of an extraordinary exhibition at the Philadelphia Museum of American History, titled Hidden Crimes Photography as Evidence in Historical Cases. At the center of the exhibit hung the 1902 Morrison family portrait, enlarged, restored, and illuminated in haunting detail. Visitors could trace every brush of silverware, every flicker of reflected light, and every subtle clue that betrayed the family's crime. Panels surrounding the image explained how modern technology had exposed what the human eye had missed for over 100 years. Dr. Patterson, Dr. Rodriguez, Dr. Thompson, and Detective Walsh all contributed to the exhibition, their essays forming a groundbreaking academic volume on the use of photography in historical forensics. Their work opened a new frontier of investigation where science met memory and justice reached backward through time. The exhibition drew crowds far beyond expectation. Genealogists and amateur historians arrived carrying their own old photographs, searching them for secrets, for signs, for shadows that might whisper of forgotten wrongs. In the wake of the Morrison case, other images emerged. Portraits with hidden hands, blurred bottles, strange reflections. Each a potential clue to a story lost beneath dust and denial. Working with the Pittsburgh Historical Society, Margaret arranged for a new memorial at Allegheny Cemetery, where Thomas Morrison's remains had finally been laid to rest after his family's failed attempt at cremation. The stone reads simply Thomas A. Morrison, 1845-1903, victim of murder, builder of steel, remembered in truth. It was a gesture of peace long delayed. A whisper of justice to a man whose last moments had been filled with fear and betrayal. And yet, even as one story found its end, another flickered into being. Detective Walsh's research traced Helena Morrison's final years to Los Angeles, where she had lived under an assumed name. In 1920, she too died suddenly, her death certificate listing gastric distress as the cause. It seemed poetic, almost inevitable. The poisoner undone by her own favored weapon. Today, the Morrison photograph rests in the museum's permanent collection, its once innocent smiles preserved behind glass. Beside it, a small placard explains how modern forensic imaging exposed one of the most intricate murder plots in American history. Visitors stand before it in silence, their reflections mingling with those of the dead, wondering how many other crimes might still linger, hidden in old frames and faded light. As for Margaret, her work did not end there. The Morrison case became the foundation of an entirely new discipline: forensic historical investigation. She would go on to analyze dozens of other forgotten cases, each time listening for what the past might still be trying to say. And perhaps that is the quiet message left by the Morrison family's tragedy, that no secret, however deeply buried, can remain untouched forever. That even in silence, the truth endures, waiting for the right eyes, the right hands, and the right moment in time to bring it to light. So the next time you look at an old photograph, take a longer look. What stories might be sleeping there, hidden beneath smiles and shadows? What truths waiting still for someone patient enough to listen?